show on Off the Ball.
With Sky. All the football you love in one place. Across Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.
This is News Talk.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then.
What about your start to the game? It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
Now, welcome along Football Show. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent has graced us with his presence. Daniel, hello.
Joe, pleasure to be here.
Let's start with some good news for Irish football. You do like a moan when it comes to Irish football.
I didn't know what we were going to talk about today, so I'm completely in the dark here about where you're going to go with this.
Wouldn't get your hopes up.
All right, okay. That's a good sell, Joe.
Good news to start with. Irish under-17s. There is a bandwagon leaving the station this Saturday. So they lost 5-1 to Poland, and most of us looking on from afar thought, that's okay. You know, they're the youngest team at the championship, and not everything in life goes to plan. Hopefully it doesn't turn into 3 bad results, but then 3-0 win against Wales, and last night 4-2 win against Hungary, and suddenly they find themselves in a European Championship quarter-final. They're into the last 8, most likely against Spain, but most certainly on Saturday. Colin O'Brien called it a very mature performance, not least given they are the youngest squad at the Championship. So this is all very impressive. Much needed good news.
It is, yeah. I mean, it is a funny one, this, because there is always an extreme of reaction to like good results and bad results. You know, like bad is like, you know, this whole national underage league system. I'm not sure if we're as competitive as we used to be. And then, you know, good, it's everything we've done the last 5 years has been brilliant. You know, and really the truth always lies somewhere in between. I've probably been writing about this today and just generally look what our teams are doing at that level and all underage levels is incredibly impressive, and it does sort of pay tribute to the quality of the coaches, both within the FAI setup and the camp, and also the coaches that work with them all on a daily basis. Because I think Colin O'Brien said it, like, by no metrics should Ireland be competing at this level. If you, and of course, you know, we love sport because there's unpredictability with it, but Ireland are actually consistently qualifying for tournaments around this level, and yet like our football infrastructure is deplorable. Like it's horrendous. Like, you know, there was a UEFA report released last week. I was looking at it, youth facilities landscape or some term, and it was the first time that they'd ever looked at the 55 member nations in UEFA and looked at the top flight clubs in each country and the number, just, you know, under a variety of headings. You know, what's the average budget? What's the average number of staff? You know, what's the average number of pitches used? And just various things, like an audit, I suppose, in effect. And again, in all these things, like you just see the Irish flag, and we are down there with like the minnows that if Ireland draw them in a qualifying tournament, you're talking about, well, we need to run up a cricket score against these. And in fact, you look at like Baltic nations and Estonia and places like that, and they're actually miles ahead of us in terms of what they're doing at underage, in terms of full-time employment and staffing. And yet we still expect to compete. We have an expectation to compete because of our traditional perception of what we are as a football nation at senior level, you know, qualifying for major tournaments and being in the shake-up for playoffs. But we sort of seem to think that we can just potter along. I say we, that's like there's a collective groupthink conclusion. This isn't the opinion of a lot of people at all, but sometimes it's like the royal we sort of feel like, yeah, we'll tune into these competitions. Yeah, Ireland should be going well. Oh, Ireland got hammered by Poland, that's bad. But actually you strip down the figures and shouldn't be competing with Poland at all, and the fact that we are, they're massively overperforming, and so with me it's like, yes, you celebrate the victory and that's brilliant, but on the other hand it's maddening, you know, because there is a sense of there's a lot of potential. It shows that at a certain level, you know, we do have the players, you know, to use a phrase that sort of that exists, but there comes a point where we have the players to a certain point and other nations generally tend to move ahead of us, and why is that? I mean, it's and so like with this, it's hugely promising, and there's some great individuals, and you're always conscious of piling pressure on individuals at a very young age. But there is some great individuals who you hear great things about, but we're still relying on maybe a lot of luck for a lot of these players to get to the next level, as opposed to thinking, yes, these will now go into our established conveyor belt production line that will allow these players to develop on their potential. There is no guarantee that will happen.
Okay. So these guys aren't coming home to a well-oiled machine where they'll be nurtured very carefully and methodically.
No, like, I mean, there's 4 nations in Europe. We've talked about this before, so if I'm saying the same stuff again, stop me. But like there's 4 nations in Europe that have an average of less than one or fewer than one full-time staff member centred on youth development at each club, per club, and Ireland is one of them. I think it's Andorra and San Marino or someone. Like, it's 4 nations of that ilk. I think Northern Ireland are actually in there too. So there's obviously something about this island's relationship that we outsource all of that. Traditionally, we'll outsource all of that to England to do it for us. And we seem to think, and this has been said to me by people involved, like, there's volunteer coaches, and we obviously have a culture of volunteerism in sport in this country in all of our games, and particularly in Gaelic games, and that's absolutely admirable. But I suppose, we're trying to compete in professional football. We're trying to compete with other countries around Europe who they have full-time staff 24/7 dedicated to development, and here we have a single figure number of people who can say that that's their job, involved in our senior clubs. So the only option we have, like, a lot of these players now are 15, 16 years of age. So the options that exist to them now, if they want to go on and progress like to full-time football, is to be integrated into the first team setup of a League of Ireland club, which is great if you're an early developer and you're advanced enough and you're able to do that. Evan Ferguson was around Bow, set up at 14, right? Gavin Bazuna was the same, playing first team at 16. These people do exist, but it won't be for everyone, naturally. Or you can go to Europe. You can do the old Irish trip to England, but instead, and in fact, for example, Matthew Murr from Cork City, he actually hasn't been starting in this tournament, but he's joining Hoffenheim in the summer, and I'd imagine a couple of others will go that route. And while there's a couple of places that offer scheme, like Shamrock Rovers have a transition year program, which is great, and you'll find that like the top select players will probably go into that environment of full-time football, inverted commas, with a first team. Like, that's going to work for certain people, but you're talking about a system that means to be around people your own age in a full-time environment every day in the best facility. That really doesn't exist over in a sustained, proper way. And some of these countries that Ireland are beating now, that are better than now, like Hungary. Now Hungary have a slightly questionable regime, right? But Orban is fascinated with football and is pumping all his money into football. Like, those kids that Ireland were better than, like emphatically better than, will now return and they'll be completely immersed in football, for the next couple of years, and they'll have no obvious distractions to that. And let's see where we are at 18, 19, and maybe Ireland will stay ahead of them, to their credit, but there is that sense of thinking what Ireland could be. What Ireland could be if they didn't have their hand tied behind their back all of the time.
So it's built on, you said, look, certainly a rich tradition and the popularity of the sport here. And then also I wonder, and this is more of a psychological aspect, but the expectation we have ourselves, that's probably factors in, it's kind of an interesting thing that we just expect ourselves, however much of a rabble, to use a slightly unfair
No, I know where you're coming from.
However much of a rabble it might be behind the scenes, it's funny, your own expectations in all aspects of your life can be important, and there probably just is that residual expectation that, hang on, we're Ireland, we should beat a lot of these countries, even if they've got a better system over there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us in our lifetime can remember Ireland being in the quarterfinals of a World Cup, or being in the last 16 of a World Cup, or whatever.
These kids don't quite have that when you start looking at the dates of birth. So.
Well, I know, it's like Mason Melia, this striker for St Patrick's Athletic, who again, clearly, right, we did watch the Irish underage teams in the late 90s. We were aware of Damien Duff earlier. We were aware of the talented players, but I remember there was still an element of Robbie Keane bursting on the scene scoring for Wolves. It wasn't quite as in your face. The social media clip of this player wasn't going around the world. Like, you type Mason Melia's name into into say a Twitter search or something last night, you find football people in Europe talking about this kid who's he's born in I think September 2007.
So do you think he was shaped by the Stan era?
Yeah, he he was born. He was born during it.
Yeah.
He was born around the time Stephen Ireland's grannies perished or didn't. Like around that month. So that's where we're talking about here.
These are Trapp's children.
This is what's your first footballing memory? You're thinking, is it Noel King's caretaker stint in charge?
Oh, yeah.
Taking over. That's. But I was looking at this, Mason Melia. Well, he's a striker. He is such a talent, and I've spoken to people at St Pat's about him who say this, and he's already made his debut for Pat's first team. The vibe would appear to be that he's not particularly sold on the European route. Now we'll see. That can always change if you get a good offer after the tournament. But that means Mason Melia is going to be at home here until 2026. He turns 18 in the autumn of 2025. So I suppose, what are we going to do for him now in the next couple of years here? And he is already in the Pat's first team setup, and I imagine he's going to be around there. But that's so what have we got for him to develop? What sort of facilities is he going to be working in day to day, or what sort of environment he's going to be in? And clearly, and the point has to be made, clearly a lot of these players, they're an absolute credit to the coaches that they've worked with, either now at the moment or schoolboys on the way up, various schoolboy clubs. A lot of this gets factions sometimes between where does the player come from, who owns the player. Clearly, people here are doing very well. But Evan Ferguson I think he was speaking at the weekend about the benefit he got from the years of 16 to 18 at Brighton. And what we offer at 16 to 18 here isn't great. And I mean, this is the thing, I think sometimes football looks like it's got the bag and bowl out all the time, and that perception is there. But you look at this UEFA report last week, and you see the comparative around Europe of similar nations, and there's a decent percentage of funding, and a lot of them, there's state funding, there's government funding, it goes into football, youth budgets, education, there's a whole piece. I see the FAI had some TDs or senators touring the facilities last night, and they are about to release a plan looking for infrastructural support and for money. But I suppose the case is there to be made. You see, we've had all this stuff with racing recently, betting tax and all of that, and actually one of the justifications that would be offered is that racing is competing with other jurisdictions where there's state funding. Football is competing with that as well too, and it's entitled to fight its case, and the team is representative of a new Ireland as well too, which is another fact that we have to. I mean, you look at the profile of that team at the moment. It's actually a really good story.
It's lovely
behind that.
If only we had, 65 billion coming in and weren't sure how to spend it.
Well, I mean, look, part of this as well. Sometimes I can understand it's here's just football banging the drum looking for money, and it's been said to me by people. I mean, Seth and Johnny had on our podcast last week talking about this. He would make the point that actually football traditionally hasn't been very good at getting its case together to looking for some of this money. That maybe if you presented a more coherent argument for support, some of that will actually be forthcoming if you can get your house in order and together and present a plan.
So at times some of the presentations made at Leinster House, or maybe even a complete absence of presentations made at Leinster House, have been incredibly damaging next to other sports. Yeah,
and other sports are better organised. I think the point will be made, other sports, and look, you have a parish system within GA that quite naturally works. I mean, there might be examples elsewhere, but it's very rare you would have 3 clubs within a mile radius. It's generally a little bit more structured and organised and coherent, where the point would be that sometimes a lot of football clubs just there's stacks of them in the same constituency, all looking for the same thing. Sure. All against the concept of say shared facilities. And I think with this infrastructure plan, from what I've heard about it so far, I think a part of it is going to be trying to break down by geography. Okay, they've effectively done an audit of facilities in all parts of the country, and they say, here we have X amount of pitches, here we have Y amount of pitches, and this is what we need. Here's how the average compares. We have X amount of registered players per capita compared to other countries, yet we have our facilities, or we have less of this. And this has been going on forever, this debate, and I just feel at the moment it's there is maybe a little bit of momentum towards changing it, because I can imagine someone just dipping in and out of this. As much as you would love everyone to be engaged with this subject, that's just not the way that life works. People dip into a major tournament, a big event, and they don't, they're not going to be obsessed with the machinations sort of week to week. But there probably is a time now to try and get the house in order and realise that actually I think this is where the results are significant, as much as the results, performances, whatever. Like, there is potential there. So can we try and do a little bit more with it and not just rely on other people to do it for us? A
quick last point with regard to this current squad: are these players all at League of Ireland clubs? Are some at GDSL clubs and more localised clubs? What percentage of them are in first team in League of Ireland?
Yeah, so 18 out of the 20 are League of Ireland clubs. All the Irish-based players are League of Ireland clubs. There's the two who are not born in Ireland.
Would that have been the case 10 years ago?
No.
This is the change to the National League.
This is the change,
before our eyes.
This is the change. Now, 10 years ago, say at this level, you might have had a team where
they'd all be at Belvedere.
Well, some were and some might have been at the UK already, depending on their age. At their age,
these are almost the first generation who are League of Ireland through their teenage years.
Yeah, we're getting there. Although, again, I suppose quite a few of them, and I think this will continue to be the case. A lot of them would have been at schoolboy clubs at 9, 10, 11, 12. But there's a mixed bag of stories there. But they are all. There is no doubt that in the future, at 15, by the age of 14, 15, 16, all the best players in the country will be at League of Ireland clubs. That's a certainty.
How many in the first team?
First team, see, Mason Melia has played for Pats. The goalkeeper has been involved with Waterford, Jason Healy, and there's one or two others have been around squads, but they are very young. This is the thing. Ireland have more 15-year-olds in their squad, and Stephen Finn, ex-FAI employee, in fairness, give him credit for this stat. Ireland have more 15-year-olds in their squad than the rest of the nations competing in this tournament combined. Primarily most kids in this tournament are 16. They're born in 2006, but Ireland have more 2007 players born than the rest of the teams in the competition combined. So this is a young team, and the fact that someone like Mason Melia is already around the St Pat's first team squad and playing, he's brought off the bench in the last game, and not just for fun,
just laughing to myself. Imagine telling these guys about Italian 90.
Yes, my dad is aware of it, you know what I mean, because it's Mason Melia is Clive Clark's nephew. Clive Clark, he would have played under Roy Keane. Do you remember Clive Clark had the heart episode in the dressing room at one time, and quite a remarkable Roy Keane comment. But again, another person from a football family, not dissimilar to Evan Ferguson and Nathan Collins, and a lot of these people have a bit of a football influence with them.
So what's Italian 90 from 08? 18 years?
Yeah, 17 years if you're born in 2007. So
everybody listening, pick your own birth date, subtract 17 years, and
God,
your knowledge of that football era.
Yeah, it's I'm thinking 1965 for me then.
The 66 World Cup, of course.
Well, we did hear a lot about it.
That's true.
Euro 96 helped us to gain a lot more knowledge of football.
That one blows my mind when you think, as a brief diversion, but in 96, when they were talking, so I would have been 9 or 10 or whatever, and they were talking about 66. But that's, no one remembers that.
Yeah.
And now when you understand what 30 years ago is,
I know it is
a living memory.
It is frightening. Yeah,
it's totally changed how I remember 96 and people talking about 66.
Well, you think about now, 1990, so the next major tournament, right, 2024, is it's 34 years on from Italia 90. So it's like an Italia 90 talking about 1956.
Or USA 94 is the perfect 96 back to 66.
Yeah.
So if Ireland had won USA 94, and at the next tournament people were, mentioning it, I now wouldn't be thinking, why would you?
Yeah, but think about it, all those English people that were still going on about 1966 and 1996 were well within their rights.
Well within their rights.
We're still, Packy Bonner's birthday, I think today, naturally the clip goes up.
Yeah.
You had Cascarino on this week.
Yeah.
Very naturally.
Yeah.
In our mind's eye, it's fresh. But then, if 20-year-olds are sitting around having a chat, sometimes it can all be a reflection of your own peer group.
No, it's true.
You see life through that prism, and our experiences. If you're 20-year-olds sitting around going, "What?"
I know, but the 10-year-old me in 96 has reevaluated things. That's all I'm saying.
Oh yeah, if you only had that perspective.
I know.
10-year-old Molloy just. What he lacked at the time was perspective.
Perspective
was the main thing he lacked.
Yeah. I did. I saw a couple of weeks ago, I think Johnny Sexton put up an Instagram reel, and it was along the lines of I'd just like to take the opportunity to apologise for all the times my 18-year-old self called 40-year-olds old.
Well, it's true.
Yeah.
But what do you say if, like, I mean, this is the thing, you end up sometimes interviewing lads now, you know, like footballers who are like 17, 18, and it's like the old reference point questions. Like if you start, like when I started off working in the media, quite often it'd be a go-to to an Irish player to talk about, do you remember 94? Or do you remember, if they were a little bit older even, they might remember Italia 90. I mean, now where do you go? You know, do you remember
Euro 16, I think?
Yeah, Robbie Brady's goal in Lille, maybe.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
probably the one. You know, Mason Melia and Co were 9 then. You know, that's a perfectly acceptable
Yeah, it's
memory.
a good formative, and not a bad memory either.
That's a good memory. But they might be on their phones during the match or something.
They saw Wes do his thing against Sweden.
Yeah, no, that's true. There's some good reference point memories there.
There are. We got to take a short break. I want to talk to you about a couple of things going on away from Irish football as well. The football show, as ever, is with thanks to Sky. Back with Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Just 1 minute.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch Premier League, Women's Super League, EFL, Scottish Premiership and much more. Live on Sky Sports.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch Premier League, Women's Super League, EFL, Scottish Premiership and much more. Live on Sky Sports.
You're very welcome back. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent is here in studio. So this is the week where Manchester City officially have won the title, where Newcastle have reached Champions League football. It's all just a bit murky. What a strange space, with City more so, I suppose.
Is it?
And the
Is it stranger?
asterisk hanging over them. It is a strange
sorry,
space.
because of the charges. Oh, yeah.
Oh, not in terms of the routine.
Romance. I thought you were on about the romance.
No. Just in terms of how it's been greeted, it has prompted, as I suspected it would, much discussion about the 115 charges hanging over them. So it's 5-6 for City, akin to Liverpool 78-84 and Manchester United 95-01. Albeit the points total of those two are not even close to what City have managed, even if you adjust for the 2 points a win in the Liverpool era. So we're seeing a glorious football, and yet most of Pep Guardiola's comments post-match at the weekend were about not most of his comments, most of the questions were about the charges. So he was talking about how he will certainly stay on as manager next year. He's contracted to 25. He will certainly stay on as manager until next year, or into next year, but he was saying he wants a verdict this afternoon or tomorrow, as soon as possible, please. He referred on Tuesday, yesterday, to this thing taking maybe 2 years. So he's obviously got some inside information. I mean, the great obvious point to make here is when we touched on this with Jonathan Wilson on Monday, when the charges were made and City denied them, City's statement talked about irrefutable evidence. And yet, if it's so irrefutable and they're so confident, why they haven't packaged it up nicely and fired it over to the Premier League to say, you've got this unprecedented investigation into our club completely wrong. Here is the irrefutable evidence. Now let's just put this away, because I'm sure the Premier League would like not to have their champions operating with this huge cloud hanging over them as well. And yet City haven't done that. And it's such an unsatisfactory space. I don't even know how to talk about their win anymore. I mean, in any other sport, Saracens or Tour de France, and it is akin to doping of a sort, there'd be a real, well, the handbrake is up here, hang on, we're not proceeding any further until this thing is sorted out. And yet we're in this limbo whereby for the next 2 years minimum, we don't know how to talk about this team.
Yeah.
It is a mess.
And it does seem like there was a month there where maybe focus switched away from it, and then it was more, they beat Madrid, it was like, oh yeah, maybe we should start talking about these charges again. You know, this could be an issue. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like everyone, well, you know, people are generally aware how the legal system's working in a lot of places and countries, and you see it here, you know, big storm around the FAI, what's going to happen, and then just it enters the legal world, and we say this could take years, and it does. And it's almost like it's the to hope that with people, people's attention spans are a little bit shorter nowadays, and sort of like that story when it broke was huge about City, and now it's just, oh God, it's like whirring away in the background, like to the point where people are fatigued by it. People just become fatigued by the discussion because there's nothing new to say, even though it's no less important. It's like a Brexit thing or a protocol. It's like, oh, the charges, can we just get on with our lives here?
And very few people, probably realistically us included, have an in-depth understanding of the regulations, Manchester City's ledger book, and the vagaries at play. Nobody can have a strong opinion. We can look at City and how they've gone about their business from afar, and we can look at the UEFA charges, which were time barred, and then in a few instances not enough evidence, but in the main time barred. And let's add that City were fined for a lack of cooperation. So we can look at the big picture and we can decide ourselves which way the wind is blowing. But in terms of understanding the minutiae of these charges, what can anyone say, really? That's a big part of the problem. But nobody likes the smell, and everybody wants it sorted out. And I don't know. Akin to Newcastle, do you have a ticker at all times when City are playing their matches under investigation as they score another goal? Well,
that's what the question is, like, we all, right, like in all aspects of our watching of sport, like you have a conflict with yourself. You know what I mean? Like if you start to strip down any sporting endeavour you have, or a lot of sporting endeavours you have to compromise with something, like we're talking off air about, say, the golf, whatever, at the weekend, and it's like, well, there's a live golfer winning, and the Saudi money, and the people have the appetite. I mean, like last year, say, when they moved, like these golfers were all facing questions about human rights abuses and stuff like that, but comes around to Sunday, none of that's coming up, but it lingers. It's there for some people, it's not for others. And we sort of all go, well, yeah, but it's a good tournament, wasn't it? And there's an element of that with City, and to some extent, and this might sound daft, it almost seems irrelevant whether the charges are proven or not, in the sense of a lot of people have just decided to roll with it. What I'm saying is the alternative is like some kind of collective protest take place. People just decide, rivals decide to we're refusing to fulfill fixtures against this rogue team because we don't know what they stand for, when in reality, of course, at various times in the last decade they've all sided with City at various times when it suited them. It's a bit like today, like there's a story about Newcastle shirt sponsorship today. It would appear, great commercial acumen, a Saudi company appears to have come forward. I mean, how have they done this? Clearly the marketing team, they got together, they rang various big businesses in Saudi with a few quid to spend, with a good budget, and they said, listen, maybe we could talk, would you like to come and work with us? And even the coverage of that from people breaking the story is saying it would appear this deal is probably within the remit, just about within the scope of the third party rules. It's like, because of course everyone knows Saudi Arabia is just a hub of independent businesses all existing together underneath one family, that it's all about free enterprise.
I'd say they've managed to negotiate a good deal, Newcastle.
It would appear that they've got a decent deal. It would appear to be in line with other deals signed by other clubs in the region. And this is the whole thing. We can look at the City thing, you step back at it, and there's obviously very specific charges about, manager salaries and very specific things, right? And if they've left themselves open to that, I mean, that's obviously daft that they have, if that's proven. But we you step back and you look at the ridiculousness of the whole thing, and you see various people who've dug into this. Some of these companies that are appearing as sponsors, what is their origin, what is their background, where do they come from? And it's like, there's a bit more than a smell off the whole thing. And again, maybe everything's absolute. There's nothing. Can't cast aspersions on some of these other sponsorship deals that Newcastle will do. Maybe it's all just perfectly normal business.
Well,
but it's playing the game.
For sure. So to Newcastle, Exhibit B in the argument that football regulation is being made a mockery of on a routine basis. I don't know if you heard the newsagents podcast looked into just even the takeover with Adam Clapton.
It's one of those stories, I must admit, it's existed in the background, but I haven't heard the discussion on it.
There's great detail, and it's just an insight into, not just, to be fair, because we hold football to an impossible standard in some respects, not how football works, but just how the world works, which is almost the most dispiriting aspect of the whole thing. So this is about government involvement, UK government involvement in the takeover, which was scuppered initially, but then a key point to jump in on is when Theresa May was Prime Minister. Heady days for us all. 2018, Theresa May and Saudi Arabia negotiated a deal which was, I think, called the British Saudi Arabian Strategic Council, but in effect this was a $65 billion trade agreement over the course of a decade, with the PIF pledging £30 billion of investment into Britain between 2018 and 2028. 30 billion is no joke. And so, the reporting at the time of the attempted takeover part 2 was that MBS was texting Boris Johnson. Boris, of course, has denied government had any role in the takeover. We did not interfere at all. That is not how we do our business here, said Boris. And so there's been a Freedom of Information Act, and there are emails now between the Foreign Office in the UK and the British Embassy over in Saudi Arabia in 2020, and the emails were to the extent that the Newcastle takeover is the immediate risk to the relationship between Britain and Saudi Arabia. Is the immediate risk. And so, 30 billion is 30 billion, everyone.
Yeah.
Let's just proceed and see what can be done here. And so fast forward, and now the PIF own 80% of Newcastle, and there is 30 billion, much needed 30 billion going into the UK. And, that's not to mention the farce of the situation that I mentioned to Kieran Kelly, who was on from the Newcastle Chronicle last night, whereby on the one hand, the powers that be at Newcastle are saying to the Premier League, you have absolute assurances this is not state controlled. It's not. And the Premier League, with great rigour, accept these assurances. And then in a courtroom in California where Live Golf are saying, you can't look at these documents as part of discovery. The Newcastle chairman, Yasser Al-Rumayyan, by the way, involved in both. He's a sitting member of the Saudi government. We're not talking about normal third parties here. You're infringing on the sovereignty of the state. This is not Dan McDonnell you're talking about. This is the Saudi government. So you're just you're looking in for the far at the whole thing, and it's just
it's one of those things that you step back from it in a documentary that's made in 10-15 years time, but various clips are chopped in and just bald facts there, and it's oh yeah, but you're living it at the moment, so it's you sort of again the day-to-day news cycle just cranks on, and there's an element of why are you banging on about this, what about it, loads of people coming to defend their club's honour, and what about them, and and it just goes round in circles to the point where you just end up fighting over it.
Yeah.
But it's happened, and once you, this was always the thing, once you have a team at the top of the Premier League that is being funded in the way that it is, and they've been the dominant team of a decade, that sort of that lays out your standards for ownership, really, and Newcastle can come in and rightly point to that and say, and classic language, what about it? Well, I have a problem with us, but what about them? And there you go. You just sleepwalk along. But where does it all end? This is the thing. We always have this debate. You always assume that in some way, is there a point where everyone just says, well, I've had enough of this? You have something like the Super League storm, right? Which, ironically, again, a lot of these super clubs eventually, came together and bowed to the fan pressure. And pundits were up in arms over it, and everyone was horrified. The threat of the integrity of football being challenged, or the Premier League being challenged, or maybe the games wouldn't be they wouldn't be they would be taken off in a different direction. We wouldn't have the traditional ladder that we crave. But with this, no one's going to get sick of watching football.
No.
You know what I mean? What's the people just collectively just turn off and say, well, we've had enough of this. Doesn't matter even in a way anyway, because the Premier League is such a global monster that even if it survived through COVID, it survived through everything. People thought transfer fees might be affected by COVID, and they've gone up. And that is the ultimate exercise in. Yeah, it just exists in a completely different stratosphere to every other strand of football now.
Yeah, it's all very tricky. And I suspect lots of people in the UK would say, 30 billion, done. They can have Newcastle. You did the right thing.
Oh yeah.
know?
Although, like, I mean, the
other
Tories
aspect.
get wiped out at the next election, but like, it doesn't.
Not over Newcastle.
No. But that doesn't matter, you know. And again, like, what do we do? Like, in 3-4 years' time, what if Man City and Newcastle are playing the best football, going at it every week? How do we feel about that game?
Well, you've just taken the last question on all of this out of my mouth, and I do suffer from this sense of, you're talking about this all the time. Stop talking about it.
Yeah, that's what you get.
I'm annoying myself. No, like a self-imposed almost sense of stop talking about this, but like, it's just all so outrageous on so many fronts. How has it affected how you feel about watching Premier League football?
Yeah, but like, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to ask, because that's probably been my feeling towards the Premier League for a while. And again though, like, but then I'm a hypocrite, like we all are to a point. Like, you know, I watch it and I enjoy it. Like, in the last decade or sort of 5-6 years, Man City have always been my favourite team to watch. You know, I love watching Kevin De Bruyne play, like, more above any player, I think, and it's brilliant. But to me, like, I don't have a Premier League club that I sort of support, and I don't care who wins or loses.
Yeah.
To the point where it's just like, well, this is what it is. I don't personally understand how people could be too invested in it, to the, you know, from the point of view of like feeling that like their voice matters as you know, as spectators from afar. Like, you know what I mean? It is what it is. It's a monster, the Premier League, more than it ever has been in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Like, on another level. And like, the point is, you know, it's like the global TV rights, you know, worth more, you know, and even the match going fans can kick up a fuss to a point, but it doesn't matter because it's all around the world. It's being watched and it will survive. So yeah, like, I mean, I'm just sort of indifferent to a lot of it. Enjoy the football, but know that if anyone sort of came to me and said, well, you're being a complete hypocrite, I'd probably go, yeah, you probably got a point. To be honest, like, I don't know how you feel, you know, with it. Like, it's still, it's like, still, like, we watch someone like Evan Ferguson come along, to make a very Irish point, but like, then you see like an Irish player succeeding at the biggest club, you know, the biggest league in the world. It's thrilling. What happens if like Newcastle suddenly signed 2 or 3 of these Irish starlets? Then what do we say about that then?
Yeah.
You know, I've always wrestled with this. Like, I'm actually sick of like football in this country being downtrodden, and sometimes with the Newcastle fans, I have a little bit of, as much as they come across horrendous in a lot of their defences, what if all of a sudden, like, you know, Qatar for some reason decided to like pump a load of money into the Irish academies we're talking about earlier, and to like fund them? Well, we suddenly think, well, finally our sport's getting...
Oh, you'd have a towel on your head outside.
But, you know, like, it is the classic thing. And some of the Newcastle fans find really annoying, and some of the stuff is completely over the top. But like, you have to sort of sit back and go, what would we do? Like, you know, it's as if there was a takeover that brought loads of money in here. But then, like, I mean, I was in Qatar for a month, and you just know, you see the obscene nature of the whole society and how it functions.
Yeah. Well, for that reason, I didn't mention the Newcastle fans actually as being some kind of reprehensible mob, because I do have a degree of sympathy for how their very genuine affiliation and love for their club has been leveraged, and it's put them in an impossible situation, and it's gone the way I pretty much thought it would go. Initial unease on the part of, I'm sure, Manny, and then pretty quickly sick of other people pointing the finger at them, and so siege mentality has ensued, and they'll live there very comfortably, I would think, for the foreseeable. So I think it's just a standard human reaction. So I don't think they're any worse or better than any other fan base.
I would think that they're almost the perfect target for it, though. If you look at it in a particular way, like if you're in Newcastle in the northeast, the neglected northeast, you probably have a little bit of that siege mentality that's there.
Yeah.
They don't care for us down in London. If the Saudis had gone to like a London club, you know, a sort of if they decide to take over Chelsea from Abramovich, right? I don't know what the vibe would be, but there's like with a lot of the Newcastle coverage, there is this tone, and you see it, of people like they've gone from Championship to Champions League, and when Newcastle were in the Championship, it was one of these great, you know, stories of like a tragedy in a I mean, and this is it, like that's in the sporting language of tragedy, and then like Saudi stuff is actual tragedy, you know, what they preside over. But what I'm saying is that there's that sense of the, like, you know, families, generations, you know, weeping, you know, watching games together, you know, this is their pilgrimage, and their club has been, you know, treated badly over the years, and they're forgotten, and it's part of the world where there isn't a huge amount, people would say, going on, apart from the football club. So in some ways, it's like the perfect place.
Yeah.
To start a project like that, because you have people who are naturally affronted in some ways anyway.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, you always have to differentiate the global fan base with people over there for whom it's a sense of place as well, where it's akin to their GAA club and it's part of.
Yes, and Newcastle and Man City both have that in common.
Do you? Yeah.
To a point, I mean, I don't know. Again, in a decade's time, sorry to go across here, like in a decade's time, is there going to be like stacks of football tourists going to watch these clubs?
Yes, there will.
In the way that they do at Old Trafford and Anfield?
That Irish under-17 generation. Old Trafford holds no lure. It's like, oh yeah, my dad supports.
Do you think?
Yeah, it's like you and the player going, my dad supports Leeds.
Like, the Man City crowds are still, you can get, and actually I've heard two different views on this. Yeah. Some people would say, well, actually, you know, if that's the size of their fan base, then so be it. Maybe that's a good thing.
Give the kids a chance to get some pocket money and be on their first trips with their mates in their 20s. They just haven't matured yet.
Do you reckon?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No doubt. In terms of how I feel about it, contradictory, I suppose, because on the one hand, I can't believe how good the football is across the board, all 20 teams. Can't believe how technically brilliant all the footballers are and how innovative the tactics are, and all the best players are here. Like in Haaland, it's one of the first times that like the best player in the world has come to the Premier League at his peak, or even just before his peak. Generally, throughout our footballing lives, and anybody before that as well, those players went to Spain. They went to Barcelona or they went to Real Madrid. But now even the Premier League has become such a behemoth that it's taken all of those players, and it has all the best managers in the world. And week in, week out, I do find myself, because I love good football, and I used to, when I was, mid-2000s, really watching a lot of La Liga and watching a lot of Premier League side by side, I would really despair at how crap the fullbacks were in the Premier League. Just boot the ball away, whereas in La Liga everything was so clever and so technical and so brilliant. Whereas fast forward now, I sit there and watch every Premier League match pretty much, and match of the day every week, and I think this is just a joy to watch. Like, I'm so appreciative of how good it is, and yet at the very same time, a bit like you, I don't care who finishes where.
Yeah, it just leaves me completely cold.
It is such an irrelevance to me. It's like something I sit there and dispassionately admire, as opposed to 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't know why it felt really important that Mourinho had won, and this was a big thing. Now maybe that's age.
Yeah, very possible.
So maybe this was coming down the tracks anyway, because how could you find it as important in your 30s and beyond? But I do more think it is just the increasing City, Newcastle-esque atmosphere which pervades, that just makes it all so pointless.
Yeah.
There's nothing organic about it anymore.
Yeah.
And the contradiction comes from the point that if we were still in the days of the Edwards family and Jack Walker and Ken Bates, I wouldn't be watching the football I'm watching. Most likely. So one has been cashed in for the other. So I'm watching it, and I genuinely think, God, it's I can't believe how good it is. And at the same time, maybe it never mattered, but it really doesn't matter now.
Yeah, I suppose when you look at the origins, like why football became popular initially, and again you go into sweeping generalizations, but there's the working man's game built around communities. Like, that's where it started from. Like a lot of the names of the teams where they came from were built around like the old industries of the time. The full stadium, like Sheffield Wednesday, because Wednesday was the day off for people in Sheffield. Like this was the steel, people working in the steel industry. Like this was where football came out of, and its popularity, and even like in this country, people were sort of captivated by the bright lights and the full stadiums and the atmosphere. And now, like it's like a lot of those things actually don't matter.
And to me, they really did.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not from Sheffield, but I liked that sense of identity.
They don't matter.
There's no identity.
And like that identity has been lost. And like you can still, I haven't been to England that much actually in the last couple of years, but I would have gone a lot probably prior to COVID. And you go to places like Preston and places where like the electricity in the town comes from the football team at the weekend. And like that still exists at a point. You still see some of the scenes in the playoffs. So you're like Luton playing Coventry in the Championship playoffs final on Saturday is an incredible story. And the mad thing about it is that one of them gets the ticket to the Premier League, where suddenly they're making more money than like every club in Serie A in a heartbeat, you know. But yet, actually, all the clubs in the Football League are running up massive debts because they're chasing this dream, and it's just like it's very divorced from where the game started, you know, and where it derived its meaning initially. And like that's why I don't know, like how do the next generation feel about this? Like, you know, I encounter a lot of people in Qatar. We've talked this at the time, like you were supporting multiple countries. You'd even chat to people now who would say that their kids wouldn't necessarily support clubs as much as they might individual players. You know, it's sort of it's a different type of engagement with football than what they might have had, what we might have had when we were younger. And it's all about the star power and the glamour, and it's about Haaland as opposed to City.
And I'm not immune to that star power.
No.
But it might as well just be Team A versus Team B.
Yeah, it is. Like there is something about, there's an NBA-esque element to it, you know, except
like the next stage is they start moving from one part of the country to the other.
Yeah, but madly, English football still has a little bit of a traditional streak that will fight that. It will run a Saudi deal through the back door, and it will run this through the back door. But if someone like talks about abolishing the FA Cup, you know, or something like that, or they'll keep this ban on live TV in England at 3 p.m. on Saturdays, which is like some last, like, you know, we're doing this for the sake of clubs, you know, for match-going fans, whatever. There's these little steps to it, so we can't go that far, but we can go far enough to be taken over by oil money. But we just, you know, don't have this. Don't have this, and that's it. And like, I mean, you know, more people are going to watch football here in recent years. People wonder, people just a little bit more, you know, just they're not, people are still as connected with English football as they ever will be, but a little bit more emotional detachment maybe.
Yeah, I think that's right.
You know what I mean? And I think like football, a lot of people for football is that sense of place.
Yes.
You know, and that's probably lost a bit.
Well, as we draw a line under the 2023 season, that is about where we are. Just to mention before we go, Evan Ferguson on Sky Sports, just calming any edges.
But like that's just been the biggest load of crap like that's been inflicted on us in the last period of time. And to be fair, like driven a lot of it by Irish paranoia. People are having a go at was it Melissa Reddy for asking the question. I mean, a lot of that's been built up from Ireland point of view. I mean, this thing that is never going to happen. Evan Ferguson has emphatically ruled out that it's not going to happen.
Well, he wouldn't have been the first time.
Well, here we go. Yeah, like
maybe we have a bit of trauma there. Okay,
it is undoubtedly created by trauma, but also a little bit of slow news day shitstirring.
Yeah, great. Well, leave me at it. It is a slow news day.
I mean, people were still writing about this yesterday. I mean, like he was asked about it, but I've taken the stance to just say, like, well, if you give this any legs, you're almost suggesting he might do it, and there's no evidence that he ever would. So why waste your time talking about it?
We haven't talked about it on the football show this week. Haven't mentioned it. So I just thought I'd wait until you were in because I thought, that'd be one for Dan.
Yeah. So shock as, I mean, no, but he's not technically tied down yet, Joe, so we need to cap him now.
That's actually an interesting point, though. He has to play 3 times, doesn't he?
He has to play 3. You have to play 3 times.
I did see a lot of people saying, but he's played against France, it's done. It's not. It's actually technically not done. I'm not giving it leg. Will you take a deep breath? Let me just read the quotes to the listener.
Okay, sorry.
You go stand in the corner. I'm not talking to you here. I'm talking to the listener.
Okay,
there's a microphone in the room here.
I know. Okay, tell them about the story that could happen.
It's not going to happen.
Then why are we talking about it?
We're informing people who may not know. I'll explain how the media works to you afterwards if you want. If we're having a pint, I wouldn't be saying, hey, say, Dan, did you see this story from 2 days ago?
But maybe that's the way it should be.
Okay. If anyone didn't see it, Dan McDonnell has seen it, so don't worry, everyone. Evan Ferguson was on Sky Sports, and he was asked if there was any chance of him thinking about England, which he laughed off and joked, well, look, I know my mother's English, so that's where it has come from, but there is no chance. What's more, my dad would never let me home. So he put paid to all that. And it was interesting as well that Nick Cox, the director of the Manchester United Academy, is now referring to Ferguson as a £50 million mistake, was the reporting. He was on trial there before he joined Brighton, although increasingly that's more of a £100 million mistake, because that's the way he's being talked about. No, sorry, you're not allowed back in here.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, sorry.
No.
Should we play him? We should have to play him against, if he's injured, play him against Gibraltar, because otherwise he could somehow change his mind. This kid from Meath, whose dad works for the FAI, who like is never ever suggested in any way there would be any element of doubt about his future. But he's committed to us. Great news for Ireland. Great news.
Okay, I'll never report an Evan Ferguson quote ever again. It's not worth the 2 minutes of the football show.
Sorry.
Oh my God.
It's just, this is actually, it's probably comes from the point of view of like working in Irish football all the time and like getting numerous comments of any chance Ferguson. It's like, there's only so many times you can say, what did Evan Ferguson have to do? Like, he played against France, practically in tears when the anthem was taking place. This is all Declan Rice's fault. Because Declan Rice, like, he cried. He sang the anthem. He sang the anthem when Irish-born kids weren't singing the anthem. He was in tears.
Yeah.
And when he goes, the integrity of every subsequent player is doubted, even if they're born in Ireland and are steeped in Irish football. People think, oh no, in some way they're going to go and play for England.
I totally understand. Just to, again, the football show this week has been Jonathan Wilson on the Premier League race,
Joe, okay.
followed by Graham Hunter and Vinicius, followed by Tony Cascarino, followed by a Newcastle piece last night. So I just thought in the, I don't know, 20 hours of sports broadcasting we do on the radio a week, this might have been worth a minute and a half.
Okay, I'm sorry, Joe.
I'm
sorry for shooting down your talking point.
Triggered much.
I'm sorry for shooting down your talking point. But
that one, yeah. No, I never presented
a lifetime on eligibility stories will drive you this particular way. From James McCarthy all the way through to Grealish to Rice, but the Ferguson one has been the worst of them.
Okay, I never presented it as we were deeply worried, but he just spoke about it, so I just thought I'd mention it. But I'll never mention it again. All I'm saying is I have a little bit of sympathy for people saying, oh, the Brits are at it again. On this one, the Irish were at it as well. I don't think you can call them the Brits, can you?
Well, I mean, that's what people say.
Okay.
Get your wind that shakes the barley sort of image out.
Listen, you're fired up, I can tell.
Yeah. But we have to get over our own issues with these subjects as well.
I am over. I'm just quoting the man.
Okay.
Honest to God. He brought it up.
All right, okay, let's move on.
I think we should. We're out of time anyway.
That's probably just as well.
The football show and Off the Ball brought to you by Sky. All the football you love in one place across Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. For the most part, Dan, what a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, John.
Okay, back after these.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch Premier League, Women's Super League, EFL, Scottish Premiership and much more. Live on Sky Sports.